When you receive an IRS CP2000, it is not something that happens to people that normally have tax problems. The IRS CP2000 is sent by the IRS when you filed your originally tax filings and there is an additional reported income to your wages and income that was not included on original tax filings. The IRS can be incorrect and you could dispute the entire CP2000. Check this out though. Although it comes in a letter, the IRS CP2000 notice is not a letter. It's an actual procedure that you have to go through with the IRS. By procedure, it definitely mimics an audit, but there's many differences. What I mean by this is that the IRS is trying to make changes to your taxes. But one major difference between an IRS audit and the CP2000 is the fact that the audit assigns an auditor, there's some back and forth, and with an IRS audit, they're trying to do about two different things. One is they're trying to add underreported income based upon bank statement deposits, transfers, so on and so forth. And the other part is that the IRS is trying to exclude deductions and credits you may not qualify for. So if you're a homeowner and you file a Schedule A, they're trying to move your itemized deductions. If you're a self-employed Schedule C, they're trying to remove some of your self-employed deductions. But the CP2000, here's where it's different. The difference is that there is no auditor assigned. Instead, what you have here is an automated letter sent off by the IRS that automatically adds the income that was not reported on original tax filings. There is no auditor assigned and expenses are not disallowed. But unlike an IRS audit where the changes are done towards the end of the procedure, this procedure begins with the changes being applied and being proposed by the IRS. And you could definitely dispute some of this. The worst thing you could do is not do anything and not even reply to the IRS. Now, if you're absolutely stuck on a CP2000, you don't know how to respond, you don't know what you're viewing, you cannot even comprehend your tax return, and you need some help, we could definitely provide a free case review with our onboarding team. But wait a minute, what if this is my income and what if this is accurate? Well, under those conditions, the IRS would probably apply a stiff penalty, maybe the accuracy related penalty, which is 25% of the additional taxes that were due. If you have a reasonable excuse, the reason why you did not include this income, which could have been for many reasons, it could have been a mistake of a tax preparer, you could have filed it yourself, maybe you didn't get your original tax form, maybe you did move, didn't get it, maybe it went to your spam folder of your email, you could at least submit a response stating that you overlooked this tax form and at least request the abatement of penalty, or when they forgive the penalty, but still assess the tax. The other part, you could completely dispute the entire thing if it's not yours, if there was a serious mistake either made by the IRS, by a tax preparer, where you're a victim of fraud, but either way, you could dispute the whole thing. In some circumstances, you might have an additional tax, but not at the amount the IRS is stating. For example, let's say you sold some stocks or maybe some cryptocurrency, and the only thing the IRS is considering is the gross amount that you sold it for. They don't take into account any type of basis or when you purchase any type of stocks. So when you submit your dispute on that, you're going to add the basis, which is the cost of whatever it costed you, and the date, so you either have a long-term or short-term capital gain, but it definitely lowers the tax upon your dispute. And if you have a lower tax, then you could also submit either a penalty abatement, where the penalty will be reduced along with your tax. Another outcome could be when you could completely dispute the entire thing versus there are certain exclusions that could be applicable to your situation. In the same example, if you sold some cryptocurrency, however, you sold it because it was losing a lot of value, whole lot fast, so you sold it at a loss. And if you sold it at a loss, you shouldn't have a tax due. Hey, if you're liking this video, please click like, subscribe to my channel. We definitely got more tax relief coming your way. Your dispute to the IRS should always be done in writing and done timely. The IRS CP2000 letter will have a due date before your response is due. You have to make sure that you submit your response in a timely fashion. That way they don't finalize these changes to you. Whenever you do submit a response, make sure it's a nice, neat packet that you submitted. Normally, I do have a cover letter. My cover letter states exactly how I disagree with the taxes, I disagree with their calculations, and I explain my calculation. In addition, my cover letter includes all of the different tax forms I am including with my dispute. When I'm done with my cover letter and my tax forms and my calculation, I put the whole packet together nice and neat. I also include subsequent cover pages for each of the tax forms I'm submitting. As an example in the packet, let's go back to the cryptocurrency. Let's say that's the issue. You would explain to the IRS on the cover letter that you're disputing the amount that the IRS is claiming, that they're only claiming the gross, and that you have calculated the actual capital gains on IRS forms 8949 and Schedule D. So part of the cover letter would be the cover letter, and then you would write a cover page for the tax forms, such as the cover page is just very simple. I type it maybe in 36 or 40 font, IRS form 8949 Schedule D. Then I apply those two different forms right behind that. And if you have other issues other tax issues that you're disputing, you would also write on the cover page. In addition, I'm also disputing the sale of the house. You're including only the gross taxable income. You're not including the tax cost basis of the house. So then I would write a cover page, section 121, form 8949, Schedule D, and a different cover page for the additional tax forms. In addition, if you happen to calculate an actual tax balance due and you're also submitting a penalty abatement request, and then on the cover page, you would run or write down the reasonable excuse or the reasonable cause for the IRS to consider forgiveness of the penalty. And then in addition to that, you definitely want to type up a form 843, which is the penalty abatement form from the IRS. So you would include a cover page for the form 843. So you would type up the cover page and then the actual form right behind that. So when it's all said and done, you gather up your cover letter, the cover pages, the tax forms, put them together, and before you submit it to the IRS, you want to make sure that you keep an exact complete copy of what you submitted to the IRS. So you could save it if you have like a Google Drive or you have your own personal storage on your computer. Go ahead and keep a full copy of that. So you would want to submit this packet directly right back to the IRS, and you submit it to the exact address or the fax number that's located on the very first page of the CP2000. In addition to that, you actually send in a copy of the CP2000. And the way you submit this is you submit it either by mail. If you submit it by mail, you got to make sure that you send it with some kind of tracking. That way you know the IRS received it, and you keep proof. Keep a printout of whenever you did submit the packet. This might be helpful later on down the road. Or if you submit it by fax, make sure that you keep the fax confirmation that shows the total pages that were sent off with your whole dispute. Here are the next steps, what you absolutely have to do afterwards. The first thing you have to do is you got to keep track. You got to call the IRS maybe about 2 weeks after you submit the whole thing. Talk to the agent and let them know that you submitted everything, but however, by mail or by fax. The IRS is taking an incredible amount of time, and it's ridiculous how much time they're taking for them to respond back. You know, because of COVID delays, they are backed up. And what may happen sometimes is they might finalize the changes without considering your response and to give you a notice of deficiency. So it's highly recommended that about 2 weeks after you do submit the whole packet, you would call up this department from the IRS CP2000, speak to an agent, and let them know that you submitted a response, that you submitted a dispute. Now, this agent more than likely will not accept anything from you by fax, but they will notate your account and put notes in there, maybe place a hold or extend a time frame for them not to finalize the changes. So the IRS definitely has to respond back to whatever you did dispute. If they respond back, they could acknowledge what you submitted and say, we disagree, we need more information, or they could even submit and say, we got your response, we just need a little bit more time to process. Another response you got to look out for is they could completely deny everything that you stated. Or they say that this time, whatever you submitted is not enough. If you have additional information to provide, they would want to consider it and for you to submit additional information. And if that's needed, review it all and see if you are able to come up with additional information to provide to the IRS. Another response could be maybe the best news in the world, and that is that they reviewed everything in your response packet and they approved and they completely agree with your dispute. And if that's the case, so be it. Either you have no balance due, you could celebrate, there's nothing else further to do. And if you're still not able to afford that payment to the IRS, you're not able to pay it off, and if it's a ridiculously high amount that you're just not able to pay off, even though it's lesser than what the IRS originally had, you could submit for a tax relief program. Now, it is not done with this CP2000. You have to do that separately after this whole thing is finished. However, if you submitted a dispute, you didn't get a response, and instead of the IRS sent you what's known as a notice of deficiency, or if you got an IRS notice CP3219A, that means that the IRS has finalized your changes. You could appeal and still submit a dispute against the IRS. However, your appeal will have to be done with the U.S. tax court. That means you're gonna have to sue the IRS, petition the tax court, and let the tax court know that the IRS never considered your response, never evaluated your substantiation, and you definitely want the court to intervene. So as this procedure is still part of the original CP2000, that is why it's by procedure and it mimics audit. Because if you completely disagree at the end stages of an audit, you could petition the tax court. That's why I'd say these two procedures are very similar. And when you do submit an appeals with the tax court, it is a second chance in one. Because ultimately, an independent office of appeals will review your entire case and they're going to go ahead and submit a settlement with the U.S. tax court. Now, if your dispute still has a taxable amount due to the IRS, and after it's said and done and you did settle out, and if you have a balance due, even if it's lower than what the original IRS balance proposed changes were, now you could deal with the actual balance outside of the CP2000 unit. As a CP2000 unit, the only thing they're in charge of is making the changes to your taxes. Now, with the additional balance due with the IRS taxes, if you're not able to pay that balance, it takes about 3 months, sometimes longer, for the CP2000 to close off their case and for the actual balance due to be transferred over to the appropriate department of the IRS. Initially, when you have a balance due, it is handled by the Accounts Management Department of the IRS. But if you're not able to pay or you don't respond in time to the other notices of the balances due, then the IRS ACS or the Collections Department takes over. And you could always submit for a tax relief program in case you're not able to pay off your taxes. The type of tax relief programs available now that you have a balance due, it could be one of the many other IRS tax relief programs. It could be part of the Fresh Start programs, an offer in compromise, currently non-collectible status, hardship payment plan, other penalty abatements, or something else that the IRS has to offer. At that stage, you would have to review your entire current finances to see what type of tax relief programs you do qualify for. We have successfully resolved many of our clients' CP2000s. So you could either give us a call or click on the link, and we're more than happy to set up an appointment and discuss your CP2000 and review what's the best possible way to go ahead and fix your tax problem.